Now we are ready to rock.
All right, welcome everybody. We're gonna call the order, verify a quorum.
When I call your name, please let me know that you are here. Joanna Olson. Actually, let me back up. I wasn't at the top. Faith Dayton. Present. Jeanette Ornelas. Here. Joanna Olson or Joseph Ditto. If she's going to be joining us by Zoom. Judy Albert. There. Camille Leggett. Michelle Fox. Ashley Hathaway or anyone with RCHBC. Reese Martinez.
Good.
Teresa DeSimone. Here. Paul Davis.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So we're gonna switch it up today a little bit and do some introductions for new folks. Paul Davis from the Mendocino Coast Hospitality Center and COC board.
I'm Priest Martinez. I sit on the board for North Circle Indian Housing Authority and 4 other tribes in that.
And our vice chair for the governing board.
Something like that.
Megan Van Sant, Senior Program Manager with Department of Social Services.
I'm Momo Hearn. I'm the second district supervisor for the county of Mendocino.
Judy Parker, the Director of Social Services.
I'm Matt McMullen. I'm outreach worker for Nation's Finest in Santa Rosa.
Jeanette Ornelas, care response unit, police department, also represents City of Fort Bragg and the justice system.
That's Brianna Ramirez. I'm the project manager in MCO. My name is Amy Nash. I'm a program specialist for the Department of Social Services.
I am Veronica Wilson, Mendocino County Social Services and the COC board secretary.
Really good individual.
And board member.
I'm Teresa DeSimone, Deputy Director for CDC.
I'm Denise Gorney with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities and the Behavioral Health Board.
So March, MCHSCoC Program Manager.
I'm Scott Montez, sitting in shadowing today. I'm a manager of the project restoration. It's going to be started for Mendocino County at the old White Deer Lodge.
You're gonna start. Yeah, I'm Faith. I'm board member at Venice Health Manager for the Compass Street Medicine team.
Sage Wolf, Redwood Community Services, Integrated Health Director.
I'm not on the board right now.
Oh.
Judy Albert, Project Sanctuary, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center Program Director.
Go ahead. Oh, either one.
I'm Sarah Carrillo. I'm a summer law clerk with legal services.
Nevin Halikamian, I'm the managing attorney of Legal Services.
And I'm Valerie Singh, City Foundation, part of the general public, I guess.
And then we'll go online. Supervisor Norval, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I apologize. I'm in a different meeting as well. Bernie Norvell, 4th District Supervisor.
Melissa?
Melissa, I'm with the Care Response Unit, Fort Bragg Police Department.
Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Riley, Deputy City Manager for the City of Ukiah.
Joelle?
Yes, my name is Joelle Chinook. I am with the Northern California Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, and I am here representing the Ending Homelessness Initiative Task Force that we are operating in Mendocino County.
Phone number, but I'm not sure who it is online. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Paul, back to you.
All right. Now we're gonna go to public comment. If you have any public comment on non-agendized item,
I received no written advanced public comment.
going once, going twice. The approval of minutes for the May 18th meeting.
I'll move.
I second the movement to approve the minutes.
Any comments about the minutes? Public comment about the minutes? Anybody has any comments or corrections? I guess we can move on to approval.
Excuse me. When I call your name, please say yes, no, or abstain to approving the minute. Faith,
Yes.
Jeanette. Yes. Judy,
Yes.
Camille,
Yes.
Priest,
Yes.
Teresa. Motion approved.
We're gonna move on to announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? Okay, we're gonna move on to reports and presentation.
Heather Dillashaw with ICF will be joining us at 2:00.
Okay.
So if we could skip that one and move on with the committee, and then we'll come back when she joins us.
Okay, great. So we'll put that on hold and updates from local jurisdictions. Mendocino County, Megan?
I wanted to update the group that we will be reviving and refreshing and going through all of the individuals who have previously signed up to be included in our homeless MDT protocol. So kind of reminding people that this protocol exists. Back in 2018, the California state legislature passed some legislation called AB 210 that allowed organizations to communicate about homeless individuals through this protocol process. So if you've previously signed a confidentiality agreement and your agency has also signed a confidentiality agreement, it allows a forum in which you can freely exchange information through the MDT process. So we've had this in place for a while. I have, probably 30 or 40 individuals who've signed a protocol in the past, but some of these individuals are not here anymore and it needs refreshment. So stay tuned. You'll all be receiving an email within the next week or two saying, this is who's already signed the protocol. Do you need to update it? Do you need to add people, remove people so that I can refresh the list? Because the goal is probably in September to launch standing monthly homeless MDT protocols. So it would allow those of you who want to talk about a particularly challenging client or just share information and get some problem solving support, you can do that in the homeless MDT protocol setting if you signed the agreement previously. This will provide some access for information and information sharing for people who don't have access to HMIS as well. That was sort of what it was designed for. And it was the pathway for people who are not plugged into the HMIS system or any of the systems to be able to share information about a client and seek information. You will obviously not be forced to share any information that you're not allowed to or don't want to. So again, it's that protected space in which you can have conversations about homeless individuals with the goal of supporting their wellness. Same kind of process adult services uses. Some of you probably go to those monthly MDT meetings. Same kind of process children's uses, although it's a little bit different in that format. So it's a pretty common format in which we are legally allowed to share information. So stay tuned for that. If there's any questions, let me know. That's on its way.
Thanks, Megan.
Will it be an additional meeting on top of our already existing twice a month? Peer conferencing?
The reason I'm saying probably in September and this monthly standing, I'm not totally sold on doing this, but in the meantime, it makes sense to refresh all of our lists.
Totally.
Again, this legislation allows an MDT, a multidisciplinary team, can be 2 people. So it protects you to share any information between yourself and somebody else who signed that confidentiality agreement. So I want to refresh it all. And then I do want to think about, is this duplicative? Is this not? It's not a coordinated entry list review. So it would be separate from that process. Again, so yeah, that part, I'm not totally sure. I don't want to add a standing meeting that's unnecessary, but I do want to get this all refreshed so that those, that we all feel confident sharing information.
Megan, anybody have some questions or comments for Megan? Sure.
just because it came up in our last meeting when we were talking about contracts, and maybe this isn't the right agenda item,
Oh, might be.
but I want to close the loop.
Okay.
So at our last meeting, we've been talking about the HAP contracts for shelter that are coming up for refreshment starting in, oh no, it's actually not the HAP contract, it's the county.
It's actually both.
It's both, but with adult protective services for the shelters. And we had been negotiating with the county for emergency shelters about a policy related to distribution of items to people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And I just want to say, so we met and had a really good discussion, and we're able to iron out some details about a policy that we're really already have implemented, but just to formalize it and get it more widely known that we are doing some distribution, but it is restricted and monitored, and then to minimize the amount of stuff that's getting out to the world and left outside, not in the trash where it should be going, but just outside. So just really appreciate the county and Paul and everybody for working through that. Thanks. I just wanted to close the.
No, I appreciate that. And that is a good reminder. So it does make sense as far as the county update. The HAP there's like every contract we have is coming before the Board of Supervisors on June 24th. So this is, it actually is the HAP renewals for the shelters, as well as 2 shelter contracts focused on adult protective services, kind of what used to be the GA contracts, and the disposal and distribution policy is embedded in those contracts. All of them.
And that same policy was also added to the Old Street project.
Correct.
Congregate shelter.
Right. Any questions on that? Thanks, Sage, for the reminder.
Thanks, Sage.
I just wanted to take a moment and share that Joanna Olson has joined. So she's one of our board members, so she's online.
Have a report for City of Ukiah, Shannon?
I don't think I have a lot of new information to add, but I will state that we are still running our home improvement program, which helps low-income people make code-required improvements to their homes, and it's eligible for both property owners and renters. So we still have that information available on our website, and it's for things like, plumbing and roof repairs and electrical stuff, and it could be HVAC, it could be insect issues, accessibility modifications. So it's a great program. It's funded through the CDBG grant, and yeah, we're still looking for recipients.
And just to clarify, Shannon, the residence has to be within the Ukiah city limits, correct?
That's correct. That's all I have, but I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has any for the city of Ukiah. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Shannon. City of Fort Bragg, Jeanette?
Don't have any new updates.
What's that?
No new updates.
Okay. Are there any other local jurisdictions present that want to make a? Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to standing committee reports. First off is strategic planning, Megan.
So we are meeting tomorrow.
So I realized I forgot we haven't agendized that meeting publicly. So I think we might have to postpone it.
I thought we were meeting tomorrow.
I apologize. We didn't do this.
Okay, the point of that meeting, which will now be rescheduled, was to seek input from the strategic planning committee on the questions and the kind of input that they were interested in for the stakeholder meetings that are coming up pretty soon. So we'll either reschedule it or seek that input from the strategic planning committee by email, kind of a one-way thing. So that was the only goal of the strategic planning committee. So we will figure out something. Stay tuned on that. And we'll be updating you about, well, maybe would this be the time to update on the?
I have it later on in the agenda under half 6.
Okay, so we'll circle back to the community meetings that are going to be scheduled soon. That's kind of good.
Thanks, Megan. Sheltering Solutions, Veronica.
We haven't met since the last update. We're scheduled to meet on July 9th. I may have to postpone that meeting because that is the day that we're looking at doing our stakeholder meetings for the public. So I'll be in touch with that committee to see if maybe we want to just move it out a week or what we want to do. So I'll be in touch soon. But no updates because we haven't met since the last time. Any question?
Veronica, we move on to coordinated entry and discharge plan.
Yep, the next meeting is on July 17th at 9 a.m. The planning group is working next on establishing the referral process in HMIS for our permanent housing projects. We're looking at working with NCO for their HAP round 4 rapid rehousing project. It's a pretty small project. They haven't learned the by name list process except for what we've taught them recently. And so I think it'll be less of a learning curve for them. And it'll also get them more experience in HMIS. So I'm excited about that. We'll also be working on doing it with the Permanent Supportive Housing Program with CDC, but I think that's going to be a bigger lift because it's such a larger program. But we are working on getting our system in compliance with the HUD referral mandates. As we discussed last time, we recently added a location or region where folks want to be housed. I haven't had any questions or issues come up with that, and we're slowly gathering that new information as we do the updates. So we're getting that information. It's just kind of slow going because we have 90 days. So I'm hoping that within the next couple months we'll really have good data on that. And we've implemented this board approved last month new policies and procedures. It just had some minor revisions, but mostly for that region issue or region data element. Any questions?
Thanks, Veronica. And community accountability, and Veronica.
So I'll give an update. I have been a little bit MIA because as much as I love to volunteer and I love being here, I do it for free because I absolutely love what I do. But in lieu of that, I had a few things kind of come up personally. And I was debating if I was going to take some opportunities to take a job opportunity in SAC or Oakland and move and do all the good things that are necessary. But for very personal reasons, I decided to stay, take a pay cut, and also go to grad school.
Wow.
So very scary to think about law school, but it's fun to see if I can hop over that hurdle. I don't think philosophy was difficult for me. Or standing up for my rights. But so I am going to keep staying here. I was in between taking a really high paying position, doing great work for housing, or staying, and I decided to stay. So with that being said, I'm going to send out an invite to Veronica tonight and go ahead and invite anyone who is wanting to attend the CAC meeting. Please feel free to join, and that way we can hone in a little bit more on our focus and then kind of refresh where we were at, right? So
I'll create a calendar invitation once I get that from Camille.
Thank you.
And I'll add our existing committee members, and then I will share the information with all our COC members. And if anyone wants to be added, you can do that. If you know you want to be added, shoot me an email. Thank you.
HMIS performance measurement, Amy?
Actually, membership committee.
Oh, yeah, membership committee.
We're I was hoping to convene with the community accountability meeting or committee. So that we could put together to co-facilitate the next COC member invitation meeting for our July 21st meeting. So as soon as I get that information from Camille, it'll actually be a combination. There's a lot of crossover between those two committees, like Faith is on both. So hopefully that'll be, one stone, two objectives kind of thing. So that'll be forthcoming and it'll be the same date and time as the community accountability committee.
All right, thanks.
Paul, I'm gonna ask if the HMS Performance Measurement Committee we can come back to that, because it's definitely gonna take longer than 5 minutes. And our speaker's gonna be here too.
That makes sense.
So I thought we should
Do that.
carry on. Can you give us an update on?
Yeah, so we'll move on to ad hoc committee reports and start with the count.
We got it in and everything makes sense. I was able to get our HMIS, all of the folks who appeared on the HIC, who basically were in a bed on that night, to actually have all of their data come forth, and it all matched. We had to do a lot of data quality improvements, a lot of work with our housing move-in dates to get our rapid rehousing to align with that. So I know that we have some HMIS improvements to make so that next year our LSA and our PIT and HIC and all of that go a little bit smoother. But we're learning and we're making those improvements. I will be presenting the results of the 2025 PIT and HIC with the HUD data that we reported to HUD at the July 21st full membership meeting, this meeting next month. It won't be the large report from Applied Survey Research because HUD didn't open the portal to submit this data. It was 2 months out. Usually we have it to them by April, and they didn't, their deadline this year was in June. So everything's going to be about 2 or 3 months later than usual because of that. But I will have those preliminary data for you at the next one.
But I think we should give,
I can't remember what it was.
no, so we are showing a 20% decrease in unsheltered homelessness and a kind of 20%-ish overall as well. So
there was a decrease in our shelter count as well because we had fewer shelter beds. Most of our non-congregate shelter projects weren't active that night. I know RCS's was, you guys had one family in there that night. But it was one of the few. So we showed fewer bed availability and use this year than last year.
So I'm excited about it. I think, the PIT count this year, I was paying really close attention. People were really happy with the guides. They felt really confident about the work that they had done. So I think that's important to accept the results as they are and consider them a positive sign that we're making a difference in improving homelessness in our community. So I'm excited. We haven't seen a lot of the detailed breakdown in terms of regionally and all of that, but it looks pretty consistent decrease from last year.
The housing inventory count includes shelters, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and all other permanent housing that's reserved for people experiencing homelessness. Usually we have more shelter and transitional housing beds than we do permanent supportive. That was not the case this time. We have grown exponentially in our permanent housing on our housing inventory count, and it really shows the improvement that we're making. Like it is like tangible. You can see
Like this number going up, this number goes down.
Right.
So I think that's probably something when if you remember our consultants, which some of us have struggled with some aspects of their support, but they did produce a pretty report. And since all the work went in last year into the design of that report, updating it this year should be pretty easy because it's already designed. But we should make sure to highlight that, Veronica, that as the housing inventory has gone up, the unsheltered homelessness count has gone down.
Is there a plan or can we plan to do a press release?
We'll be happy to do a press release when they do the pretty report, because the report you get to HUD is all organized in a way that makes sense to HUD.
And PDF.
No,
I'm not talking about now. I'm talking
Yeah.
about when we have it all pretty.
Yes.
Okay. I'll shift perception.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Heather Dillashaw with ICF has joined us now.
Great.
So we can go back to that agenda item. Hi, Heather.
Hi there, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
You want me to handle this?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Heather. We're all in a room here. I don't know how well you can see us, but this is
I can see y'all pretty well, actually.
Oh, okay. This is Megan talking for right now. If you all I'm just going to orient the board and where we are and why you're here. So if you remember, we have a very long process of hiring a consultant to do evaluations of shelters. ICF was the consultant who did that evaluation. Heather and her team did some site visits, did a whole lot of work in the back end looking at HMIS data and produced a public kind of executive summary, a really detailed HMIS review of our shelters, and then individual reports to each of the shelters as well. We wanted to give Heather the opportunity and all of you to communicate with Heather directly, see if there's any informal questions you had. I have some to kick us off if nobody is ready yet, but I'll start with the group. Is there any, well, let me do, before that, Heather, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly and then we'll get to the questions? You're not just like on the spot.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everybody. I know I was able to meet and talk with some of you, but my name is Heather Dillashaw. I'm a consultant with ICF working in the homelessness and affordable housing space, and have worked in this field for over 20 years now, and seen a lot of different shelter implementations, a lot of different ways that public funding is used for shelters. So I was happy to be a part of this work for Mendocino County. And we had a couple of folks on my team, one who is a they're both data experts, but one who's really good at diving into what it looks like in California for shelters. So the other two folks on my team are California based. I'm based in North Carolina, but they are California based and looked at your data. And so some of the comparisons you see there come out of their knowledge of California as well.
I brought this, that one of the staff vendors was our consultant and TA provider on our HMIS capacity building grant, so she's really familiar with her.
Yes.
Okay, does anyone have questions for Heather? Do you want me to get us going so you can think about it as I?
Yes.
So, and I gave Heather a little bit of a heads up literally like 2 hours ago. So she's, so Heather, was there anything that surprised you about our shelter system in Mendocino County?
That's a great question. I mean, surprise may not be the right word, but your shelter system is unusual for a rural county. It is unusual for a county of your size, a COC of your size, which is considered a very small rural population, as you know. But in the scheme of COCs, you are definitely on the smaller side. If you look, and this is true even in California, but if you look at rural COCs, your size, there's often only one shelter option, if there is that. And that shelter option is more often than not a domestic violence shelter, because there are various funding streams for that outside of the COC program. You have chosen to use your public funding in various ways so that you have three very different shelters in your system. And so in that way, you are addressing the needs for shelter above and beyond what most rural areas do. It doesn't mean that you are, as you are very well aware, are meeting all the needs, right? There is not a community in the country that's able to do that right now. But you are, in the context of rural continuums of care, definitely meeting the need more than most.
Thank you for that. That was something you had said, Heather, that caught my attention because I'm not as familiar with like the national perspective on it. So what do you think the primary strengths are of our shelter system?
I think it's the same answer. I mean, I think that you have diversified your services so that you can meet three different distinct sets of needs, right? I think somewhat the exception is the Fort Bragg shelter, right? Hospitality House is serving families one family at a time, but families and adults trying to do all things to all people, right, on the coast, which is impossible to do. But in the other part of the county, like the Ukiah based shelters, like you're really doing two very different things, and both of them are, for what they're trying to do, are operating relatively well, which is unusual. So I think the strength of your system is that you've been able to do that and even still have something on the coast, right? Like generally in a county like yours, Ukiah, like would be the only place there'd be anything, right? And you have two there, and then you still have one on the coast as well. Um, so I think that's your strength, is that you've seen the need and you've had the public support to meet as much of the need as you can.
Thank you. What do you think are the most significant areas of concern? I feel like I'm interviewing you, so this isn't really supposed to be an interview. So the rest of you should jump in if you want. It's just that I've engaged in this material a little bit more deeply probably than some of you. So please interrupt, ask questions or whatever, but.
You're doing great.
All right. I'm just
Questions, okay, love them.
So I think trying to figure out how to phrase this. So it's because it's not a criticism. It's when you look at your numbers, right? And it sounds to me like you were just talking about Pitt and Hicks. So you've been looking at your numbers. Your unsheltered and sheltered population of adults is by far your biggest percentage of folks who are experiencing homelessness. That continues to be true. Your housing outcomes have exponentially gotten better in the last couple of years, which is also great to see. But you are putting, percentage-wise, a great deal of money into your family's only shelter that serves the smallest amount of people and the smallest percentage of people experiencing homelessness in Mendocino County. That is not to say that what Ford Street is doing is not necessary and good, and that they're not having good outcomes. All of those things are true. You know, sober living and sober recovery spaces and shelters for families that need that are vital for good outcomes there. But percentage-wise, you're skewed in where your funding is going. If you were looking at your funding in an equitable way, that we want to put the majority of our funding toward the highest number, you know, where the highest percentage of people experiencing homelessness is, you're backwards on that.
have you, I think supporting families with children can be more expensive, it feels like, just in a
Absolutely.
So it sounds like what you're saying is funding family shelter is not super cheap, I guess, in a general sense.
It's not.
So,
I mean, no shelter is cheap, right? Like shelter
Yeah.
operations are one of the most expensive parts of any service system, right? I mean, a 24-hour services, operations, all the, it's very, very expensive no matter what. And families with children, when you want to have separate spaces, those kinds of things, which Ford Street's been able to do, it's very expensive.
So are you saying that, and I know I've tried to pin you down before, Heather, and you just won't do it. When you're, and I know why, and I respect why, but is our cost per bed night excessive or average, or? And you can.
It's not excessive.
It's
It's not excessive. I think, and fortunately, there is no average, right? Because every shelter has different property. Every shelter does things a little bit differently, both in your county and across the country, right? So an average bed night is really hard to quantify overall, but your bed nights are not excessive with what you're paying. When we look at the overall financial system, this is just for the three shelters that we evaluated, and look at their budgets, right? Ford Street is funded almost solely by the county. And that's really risky, right? I mean, that's really risky for that nonprofit, if that funding changes, then all of the folks that live there and are being supported there are really, it's going to be a challenge, right? So it's a risky business model, one, so that's a red flag for us, but it also is a red flag that so much of the county's money is going just to one shelter and it's the shelter that serves the smallest percentage of folks that are experiencing homelessness. Again, it's not a comment on what they're doing at all. It's just a matter of, if you look at, and one of the things we were asked to do was look at how the county was funding, that's what it looks like.
Okay. Any follow-up questions on that?
No, I do. I do. What are we doing with this report? Because it seems like she's saying we're going backwards supporting 4th Street. What are we doing with the report? Is it something that I bring back to the table and talk about? Because I don't want to lose support for families. How do we collaborate to say, how do we fix that problem? Instead of saying, well, because it's a report, we're just going to do this. We need to come up with solutions for the issues that this report's come up with. And, I don't see
Jackie's
Jackie
not
here,
here.
to defend
Right.
4th Street. And I don't think that, I'm not saying it's not fair. I'm just saying I think we still should have this conversation with Jackie to come up with the collaborative, because we're all here together to help this county to help that. I'm not saying this report's bad, but I felt like I've been through these meetings where reports happen, then guess what? The higher ups change things based off these reports, and the experts are not here to talk about these things. We're the experts to talk about. So I'm just asking, where's this report going?
Yeah.
And how do we solve this issue if we are spending excess money on 4th Street? How do we subset these things? Because when I was talking about the other entity for us to talk about more funding, I know there wasn't a lot of interest, but it's more of, hey, we need to go after the philanthropy money before these things happen, before funding kind of goes away for these places that are taking care of our community members here in Mendocino County. And I don't want that to go away. That's all.
No, I think that's totally fair. And I should preface it by that we're not making any decisions based on this report as of COC today. And this information, what Heather is sharing here is not totally new. We're giving her the opportunity to talk about it with us, but they did highlight in their report the risk, and then one of my questions is about that, of an institution having most, not all of their funding through one funding source. And I think for me, what the shelter evaluation helped expose, and expose is a stronger word than I don't mean expose, but give us a forum to have these conversations that are a little bit hard. I have wanted for 4th Street's benefit and for all of the shelters' benefit to have a diverse funding source. It's safer for them, it's safer for everybody. And what I see this report doing is helping us advocate to other funding sources and say, look, we're carrying the ball for this very important program. There's substance use work going on there. There's mental health work going on there. This is a population that's of a high priority to a lot of different people. The COC shouldn't be solely funding it. It should have more diverse funding sources. Veronica have not been successful in that sort of advocating for that yet. But the report gives us and Jackie, I think that, and again, it's hard to talk about, Jackie's not here, but gives those institutions to say, I'm overly funded in one funding source and I need the community to help fund this important service that we know is important for the whole community as well. So, but just to make sure people feel secure, our shelters are all funded for another year, regardless of this report. So there's no dramatic thing happening for this report.
And to be clear, we didn't say to defund anybody. we did not say that.
No.
If I want to so I've been hearing that I interpreted this report and I'm hearing what you're saying when we discussed it last meeting. Not that this is you guys are doing bad because you're overly funding family shelter when adults are the higher percentage of unsheltered people. I haven't heard that as you're doing, this is a bad thing as a community, just that it is a thing. And if we're going to do that, are we doing it consciously and on purpose? Because there are communities who dedicate their funds to have said, we're going to first tackle veterans homelessness.
Right.
And even though that is a fraction of a percent of the population experiencing homelessness, out of our 600 people at V2, 4 of that we served last year 4 of them were veterans. But there are communities that do these things on purpose. And I do think that Mendo, to some extent, did family focus on purpose, coinciding with the pilot project of the front door for families. And coinciding with the NCO rapid rehousing for families, saying that there was a
Deliberate
I mean, it
choice.
wasn't necessarily like, I'm just gonna own it as like a person and, our shelter and building bridges is adult focused, so like it's not the only population to focus on, but there was a deliberate, like, we are gonna do these specific strategies to intervene with families.
Yeah.
Even though they are a smaller percentage of the people experiencing homelessness, and that's okay. It's okay for us to say, we're gonna do a subpopulation and see what we can really do to address it. I think with that, it is really looking at this unsheltered adult homelessness. It is kind of it's the biggest, most in your face publicly piece that I think what this is showing is it is supporting the like, how do we get behind that?
I mean, you could look at it in so many different ways. On the other hand, I think when we looked at where have we expanded in permanent supportive housing, for example, most of the new units that were built were 1 and 2 bedrooms, or many of them were studios. So some of the long-term housing investment has been in not family focused, which is great. Like that's a good thing. But if you kind of put all these pieces together, we just are looking at all the facts of what we've done so far and how this community's evolved. And I don't know. I see this report as like, this is the facts, and then we can interpret them. Is this still the priority we want? Are there some political factors in here that are important to us that we just need to acknowledge? But this is just the kind of like objective. This is what I'm seeing with the numbers. And I will say that the exits to permanent housing for the family shelter are pretty high. Yeah. They're much higher than our other shelters, which is all to be expected. I got the sense from Heather, these outcomes are pretty much what you see. There's nothing kind of like shocking. I think when I sent out the report, I was like, don't worry, there's nothing shocking in the report. So we're not, which is a good thing. We don't really want shocking evaluations. I don't think that's not.
And I have a question. Heather, hi.
Hi.
I have a quick question. So when you say exits to housing, are you looking at the duration of how long the person has been housed for? For instance, if someone has been housed for 6 months or a year or 2 years, re-enters into the system of homelessness, is that also incorporated into the data as well?
It is in the time frame that we looked at, right? We didn't look at and because of the way your data is, it wasn't possible to do like a tenure or any kind of look like that. But we did look, and so within the time frame of the data, I think we ended up, Veronica, you may remember this better than I do. I think we ended up with a 24-month point in time. And within that, we looked at whether there were any returns, right, within that window that we were looking. Now, if you follow up with those folks today, right, that number may have changed slightly, but in general, recidivism for families is lower than individuals. And there are lots of reasons for that. And honestly, a lot of it is anecdotal, right? That families are easier to house because people want to house children. It is just easier to have, landlords are much more willing to take families with children than they are a single adult who has a history of having high barriers to housing. It's just the reality. So there's that. And the other piece of that, and one of the reasons that Ford Street's outcomes are as high as they are, is because of the very intensive services that they give to the people that they serve, right? And that's because they're small and they can do that, right? Like they're only have a small number of beds, and they work very intensively with the folks that live there, right? We were able to talk to the residents there. One of the things that struck us was that every one of them had a story about how one staff person or another, like worked with them almost every day for a year. Right?
Wow.
I mean, you can only do that if you have a very small amount of beds and staff that can match that, right? Like if you look at like Sage could never say like that we could do that with everybody for a year. Like there's no way, right? I mean,
a person every day for a year.
right. I mean, they can't do that, right? Because they're serving too many people and they don't have a staff ratio that would allow for that to happen. So again, that's why it's hard to, like, they're not apples and oranges, right? I mean, these shelters all function very differently.
Just a comment in terms of, I don't know whether this is completely true for Fourth Street, but I know that we sometimes struggle with it. We're the domestic violence shelter and we have transitional housing. Is that if you don't do a housing first model, a lot of funding is not available to you. And and we do kind of a blend a little bit where we give people a chance and opportunity, but we ask people to try to be clean and sober because we have children. We have both our transitional and our shelter is congregate living. So we can't have people using drugs around children, et cetera. It gets complicated. But a lot of funding is not available to you unless you do a housing first model. So if Fourth Street is very strict about that, because I know they are, a lot of funding will not be available to them.
I think, yeah. However, I mean, yeah, right. I mean, they have received funding that's supposed to have housing for, and we spend a lot of time kind of, the housing first thing is very difficult right now. The policies are changing. One of the takeaways that I heard pretty clearly from Heather is you kind of got to choose one or another. It's really hard to have a kind of blended model of housing first and expect sobriety. I mean, it's just like, it's really hard to do. Well, I do think though that where, in my viewpoint, we haven't done as good a job at the COC in kind of pushing and understanding and advocating for a fair amount of behavioral health funding, which is both substance use focused and mental health focused. It's still not, I don't have my head wrapped around it, but there are funding sources designed for people that do need to be sober or want to be sober. And we haven't figured out how to kind of get a handle on that very well. So at the same time, I think it used to be true, and it still is, that a lot of funding was housing first focused. There's also new funding that is behavioral health focused that doesn't have those same limitations, obviously, because they're a different point to them than that. So that was one of my takeaways, is that we really, for these sites that are, and maybe like yours, that are not, can't be like super Puritan housing first. Right. Are there other funding sources?
I have a question. Heather, this is Sage, and I don't know if this is a data point that you guys looked at, but did you look at the length of time people stayed in shelter before exits? And did anything stand out to you there?
We did. You have a long stay, particularly on at Hospitality House and at Ford Street. The stays are long, and that was true both in your data and in the conversations we had with folks. And was all directly related in Hospitality House in particular. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that the lack of housing to go to from there, right, is that it's hard to turn over when there's not an exit to go to. And then with Ford Street, their program is set up so that you stay a long time. So that the services that they're providing, the family reunification pieces that folks have to work through the court system with, like those are things that take months and months to accomplish. And so it's inherent in Ford Street's model that the stays are going to be long. The stays at yours, Sage, you had a couple of outliers, like a couple of people that were like over like almost like 18 months or something that kind of skewed. But once we figured out that those were outliers, yours aren't a lot different than most of the country right now, unfortunately. That, there are long stays, but there was nothing alarming other than the outliers, which are also not unusual with the size of shelter that you run.
Thank you.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Heather, tell us about the stakeholder interview. So we gave Heather a list of stakeholders, some of whom are in this room now, and some of whom have different viewpoints on homelessness and how it should be handled. And I'm just curious, what were your primary takeaways from those stakeholder interviews, Heather?
And this is not unique to Mendocino County. In general, your community partners want your shelters to solve everything about homelessness, right? They want to not have to see it. They want the shelters to be able to take care of everybody who's homeless in front of them so that nobody else has to worry about it. That's true kind of across the country, and I bet everybody in the room who's a service provider understands that that's kind of the flack you get, right? I think that for the folks who are elected officials that we talk to, the pressure to have a solve is very high from their constituents, and they put a lot of that pressure on the shelters to do that. Um, it wasn't anything unusual that we heard. It was what we expected to hear. It's what we hear everywhere. It's certainly what happens in my community. Um, and at the same time, and I had a chance to talk with Paul earlier today. The feedback in particular for the coastal side of things was they really want house and hospitality center to be the end all be all for everything over there, and they can't do it. Like that's unfair, right? They can't be a sober living place for families where families and children are going to be safe and be no barrier shelter for adults that are going to put children in danger, all in a very tiny site. Like those are not things that are possible to do. Um, and they can't turn over their beds to accept 20 new people every day, right? That's just not a reality of where numbers and resources are. So I say all the time that, people ask impossible things of shelters all the time. We expect that homeless services shelters are able to serve everybody who is homeless all at one time when the homeless folks, the community of folks that are experiencing homelessness is as diverse as the rest of us. And we can't all get housed in the same place at the same time, right? I mean, we shouldn't be expecting that of our providers either.
Then Heather, I have another quick question. When you had your one-on-one conversations with some of the participants involved in the study, did you get a chance to figure out some of their stories as to why they were homeless and some of those specific barriers that were contributing to their situation?
Sure. It was, I mean, they were all different, right? All of it came down to a lack of a support system to help them address the issues in front of them, that finally led to the last housing option not working out, that put them on the street. Some of them, it was a loss of a job, there were medical issues, there were, in the family shelter, we had talked to 3 different families. Two of the 3, it was a change in relationship, meaning divorce or abuse or something like that that led to the ultimate no residence for the parent and the child. Drugs came after. To a lot of different things. Wasn't unique. Wasn't the same thing for everybody, but definitely all the things um, that one would expect. I mean, I'm glad that Megan brought up the behavioral health funding piece. That there seems to be a disconnect there around funding in your community. They certainly should be should be giving money for the work that your shelters are doing if they are not.
I've noticed that. I mean, I like you, Priest, I feel a little uncomfortable talking about 4th Street without 4th Street here, but I do know they serve a lot of families that are required to go through a process, and they're motivated to do that in order to resolve child welfare issues that they're having. Often those issues do involve substance use. So I do feel like the COC with our generic homelessness funding is kind of supporting this complex need that should be supported by a diversity of funding sources, honestly. So that's been kind of my takeaway there. And I think we'll get there. I do think that we'll get there over time.
Can we just put that in our strategic plan?
We really should, yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
because the year is gonna go by quick and then we're gonna come back to the same problem.
It's
I just think with the outside sourcing of saying like SASWA, and then we go after California Endowment for them, we help them see where they can go after funding.
Yeah.
I only know this because I do it every day.
Right.
Right, and I want to help, and I think that's the part that's missing is the extra resources that we don't know about. There's BCHIP, there's Prop 1 money, there's everything out there right now for substance and mental, so.
I think if the COC should be supporting our important homeless service providers in diversifying their funding sources, because that's for everybody, including them. So I agree with you on that.
Okay. So in that meeting, strategic plan?
You can be.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So Heather, just because I know that you do this all the time, do you also have any kind of recommendations, or have you observed people in other counties running shelters in terms of who are doing it better or have some unique ways of doing it.
I like that.
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I have seen anybody, but I mean, we were very impressed with your system. Like I said, the diversity of it. Building Bridges is one of the most competent no barrier shelters I've seen. With property.
Reiterate that, please.
Building Bridges is one of the most competent low barrier shelters I've seen. I know a dozen or more shelter providers that would do a lot to have the property that they do, where they have the space around them that they do, to be able to do the things that they do with folks who really have no other option. Ford Street's outcomes are incredible. And Hospitality House is doing an amazing job in a really isolated location, with adults and families, and any overflow, anything they can do through Hospitality Center too. So I don't know that I've seen places better, as far as the work that you're doing. I have seen better funding mixes. That is one of my bigger concerns. I mean, I've said this to Megan and Veronica, is that, I certainly wouldn't want Ford Street to go away, but it really makes me anxious that they're almost entirely funded by one funding source, right? I worry about what would happen there, to all the folks that rely on their services, right? So I think that's the piece that I've seen done much better in other places, is the diversity of funding. That I think is a growing edge for y'all to figure out.
So just another one. I know from the beginning, I mean, people always just talk, I don't know whether this is correct or not correct, and it's not that I want to put people in silos, but people always just talk about homeless, just as the big encompassing homeless. But they never want to say homeless with mental health issues that might be really blocking them from maintaining an appointment, showing up, filling out a form, or nor saying anybody has any substance abuse issues, which also might be creating difficulties for them. I mean, is it better just to keep on calling it homeless rather than maybe sometimes naming a problem? I'm just wondering.
You mean if there's a segment of the population that their primary barrier to resolving their homelessness is severe mental illness.
Yes.
If it's a severe mental illness situation, and we keep saying this is a homeless situation,
Yes.
maybe we can talk about the severe mental
Yes.
illness situation.
Yes. That's what I was wondering about.
Homelessness kind of overrides all the other things, and it's like, well, we have to address the other things before we can address this big overlying homelessness.
I worry about going to the issue is mental illness rather than focusing on the housing, because it dilutes the importance of the housing element, and also it's actually not there are lots of reasons for homelessness, but at the end of the day, it really is person's homeless because they just literally don't have housing that they need.
I kind of just think
Regardless of the mental illness or the substance use or all those things, there are people in housing who have mental illness, who have substance use challenges. And when you're focusing on one of those rather than the housing itself, I've seen it dilute the challenge.
I don't think we can say it's all one or the other. I mean, I can think about individuals that we have housed at Live Oak. They walked away from the unit because of their severe mental illness. It was not a housing issue. And I think we need to acknowledge that there are individuals that the primary issue is that, right? Like, they have been offered housing. They've been living in that housing. I'm going to give 2 in my head right now, three that walked away from it because of their mental health issues. And if those had been successfully treated, they'd be able to stay in the housing that was offered to them. So I think it's not always, it's not an either or. It's not, which is sort of to Heather's point, it's so diverse. Everybody's stories are totally different, and there isn't a one size fits all.
And I don't think that it's necessarily saying you're siloing out the issues. It's just recognizing those barriers, because like they're saying, we don't really have a lot of that funding in the mental health side of things. So people come to MCO and we're seeing these barriers that are really, relevant, and it's hard to do anything. And it's like, well,
we can put you in a house, we can get you there, but then like you're saying, they're walking away 2 months later because of whatever, struggles that they're dealing with. So it's really just identifying those barriers and figuring out how we can help with those too. It's almost like a kind of a wraparound, what are all the issues instead of just, but also figuring out where are the service gaps in our community that aren't coming in or that we don't have that aren't fitting for them. And which is what I've seen a lot is that we have a limited surface, support services as well that have limitations on what they can and can't provide and how it's provided. So it's hard to, one size doesn't fit all. And so you've got those folks that it's not whatever the support system that isn't, they say it like Oak, isn't going to meet the needs of every single person who tries to access housing there, just like the supportive services that are available for a place like Willow Terrace or our Valley House or any of these projects. It's not going to be the right fit for every single person.
No, which is why the diversity of options would always be the best. A diversity of well-funded, diversely funded, permanently funded options would be awesome. But yeah. Can I, one more question for Heather. Other than diversify your funding sources and pay attention to that, which I'm not dismissing that, I totally hear that. What other, do you have any advice for the COC specifically around shelters? And I think particularly, Heather, because you're kind of outside of California, especially based on the trends and actions you're seeing at the federal level. And this, I'm looking for advice to us on what you're seeing coming down the pipe.
I don't know. I mean, that I wish I it is as chaotic as it appears to be. So I don't, it's unclear to me what the federal funding landscape is going to be and what the compromises in the eventual budget will end up being and what the impacts of that will be. For federal funding, it's not clear to us yet. I think one of the things that I think would be useful, and I think y'all started bringing this up in this conversation, is to figure out what your goals are for shelter, right? Like, do you have a focus? Do you have common goals that you are working toward in these different models that you want to see progress on and hold each other accountable to those, right? If it's somebody mentioned, like, is it veterans or is it families or, what are your goals? And what are your goals for the various populations experiencing homelessness in Mendocino that you want to see over the next 24 months or 5 years? Like, what's that look like? Where do you want your funding to go to support those goals? I think that can be useful in figuring out where your funding is going to be utilized best. I think it can be useful in helping you know how you are reaching out collectively with asks to different funders, right? Like the best asks come collectively and not from 5 different individuals going and asking for the same thing, right? If you want more behavioral health funding for your shelters, do that collectively. Figure out what that looks like and what the outcomes and the benefits to the behavioral health system would look like. Just an example, but what are your collective goals and how do you collectively go after them?
One last question. So when it comes to dealing with the more chronic homeless population in regards to like mental health as well as substance use, have you seen any positive outcomes with counties that have more rehabilitation centers or stabilization centers that those individuals can go into those stabilization centers, get up to like almost 90 days of treatment and or their medications, et cetera, work on some small skills and then go into like a step up housing or intern housing? Has that been more successful? Have you seen like a trend with that?
No. That works for a small set of folks. If they're already experiencing homelessness, overall, folks are experiencing homelessness when they go into a 90-day program, exit into homelessness pretty quickly thereafter, if they don't have permanent housing on the other side of that.
Yeah, if they transition, they have to go to permanent housing and not interim housing. So is that what you're saying?
Generally, that's what the data tells you, is that the halfway house, the recovery house, sober living interim step that you're talking about, that does work for some people. It does not often work for folks who come into those things from being literally homeless.
Okay.
It can, but that's rare. It's rare that someone who is an unsheltered or long-term shelter resident can do that. It happens, but it's not common.
Okay. So you would say like if they enter into permanent housing, that they would have to have more intensive wraparound services, working with someone to, you know, and
Those are the best outcomes, yes.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Heather. You're awesome.
Okay, we're kind of near the end of the time. Do you have anything you want to share with us, Heather, that we haven't brought up that you felt like was really important to let us know?
I don't think so. Like I said, we were really impressed with your system. Appreciate being able to see on the ground what y'all are doing, and really appreciate being part of the work. You know, we wish you the best and hope that we'll get to be involved with you in other system level kinds of looks down the road.
Great, thanks. Any last questions for Heather before I let her go? Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.
See you. I go through this. Maybe watching the recording, but I can see it, but it is in the packet as well. It is.
You have a comment?
Yeah.
Just before we leave the topic, this is like how important it is for us to sit here and have discussions like this. Like coming to a meeting once a month, it doesn't work for me. Like we need to have a strategic day planned out where we sit here and talk about these topics because it's real. I'm just saying, like, I'm willing to do that because we got to help support our community and teach them. And like I said, we're going to get into the public housing, supportive housing. You know, we're going to get 50 units built. We're going to do that, and it's going to be baby to me too, just like the rehabilitation center. But I'm just saying, like, we got to learn and we got to keep creating these places for people to live. You know, we got a shelter, not a shelter. We have the little sixplex, my first time ever doing it, but it's my step. I don't want to quit there, right? And utilize these tools that we have while I sit here. You know, use that tribal, you know, support too. You know, we get set asides that we can collaborate with individuals. You know, like I said, we're going to go after that supernova and bring some permanent housing here, you know, with us. And yeah, I'm a little afraid to do it, but in all honesty, it has to happen. You know, I'm going to ask some of you all to collaborate with me to teach me what that looks like. You know, we've been doing with other organizations for years, but, you know, we're the experts when it comes to this county. We're the citizens of this county. And then regardless of how we label them, they're still a human being. And I still want to treat them as such and, you know, do what we can, you know, and I don't know. I just don't want to like fall off and come out here once a month and just listen to reports. Like I want to be a part of getting in there and creating something where the COC is just like, we help build these people up. 4th Street's on their own, or CS is on their own. And you know what I mean? That's how that's how us as tribes say it. You know, we need to economic develop ourselves. What we do is start with our land. You know, what we were given, you know, what, and it's not saying it's bad, just what we were given, you start with there. You know, what we have, we just build off of that. And I just want that too, because we're going to be buying a motel here pretty soon. And I'm going to need that help and that kind of guidance. Yeah. I'm not afraid to go after that money. Okay. Sorry.
So, but also I would really like to thank, you know, social services for going ahead and contracting with ICF and making this kind of a report, because I actually do find this really, really valuable. Because, you know, I have my own attitude, maybe in terms of shelters or whatever, and it really helps to get this like overview from somebody who goes around and does this as a profession and realize that we get this level of high marks. It's really pleasing.
Yeah, I to share that information with the community too, of, you know, they heard from a lot of our partners, well, they're not doing anything, they're not fixing it up. We just were told that we're operating better, that they go all over the country.
Right.
So acknowledge the successes where they're happening. And yes, this is a bigger problem, but maybe to kind of create that bridge of here's what we're missing out on, but also acknowledge what we're doing.
For a very long time, we've acknowledged as a COC that our ability to do public relations, to talk about what we're doing, has not been our strong suit. And so as we get more pieces of information, like we got an outside objective evaluation, we paid for it. I mean, we were important enough to the COC to go enter into a contract with a neutral third party to tell us what are you seeing? And sharing that is important. It's sharing the pit results and recognizing that maybe the numbers went down because we're doing a good job is also important. And so I totally agree, Brianna, if it's not been what we've been able to do well, we can't do it well. So we need to keep trying.
Yeah, because it helps with that community buy-in. You know, we all have our own preconceived biases on how things should work, could work. And when you have numbers in front of you, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that comparative to outside of our little tiny county, we're doing big things. So shelters are, for lack of a better phrase, kicking butt.
I think also making sure we share the recognition. County, some nonprofit developers, some for-profit developers, CDC, they've invested really heavily in building new housing, seeking new vouchers. All of those things are playing into exits to permanent housing. I mean, 100%. So there should be some shared celebration and responsibility for the positive outcomes that we're seeing, and make sure that we give credit to those places that are building those things and creating those opportunities. I was surprised that we have more shelter than kind of average. I just didn't realize that. That was one of the things that which is interesting to me. Makes me think these other communities have no shelter at all. I just didn't realize that was it.
Or that they're only located in the one major city. That would be problematic.
I also think that Pre's comment about, so we had this was a useful conversation, and we do need to make sure that we have space to, I mean, Heather's kind of challenge to us, or what are our goals for our shelter? And if I had to answer that question, I'm not totally sure what I would say, what they are. So if we did get like real clarity on that, are we prioritizing certain populations, or are we prioritizing exits to housing, meaning we're comfortable with longer lengths of stay because that's really important to us. Like we haven't really communicated as a group and settled on these are our goals for the shelters. And it's a worthwhile opportunity.
That would be the most helpful thing ever for me.
And that's something we should do through the strategic planning process. So we should be taking these pieces of this. Did the shelter evaluation. We have our pit count data. We have a community stakeholder meetings coming up through this process. And we should, I think like a day-long retreat is not a bad idea. We've had a long chunk of time to really use that information to set our goals.
It could be pretty amazing to use the stakeholder meetings around shelter to see what are to gather that lived experience piece around. I think that would be super helpful.
You know, I must admit, I have found ever since we've had it for about 12 years now, our transitional housing program, and we don't do it the way some counties do it because we figured, okay, we're still going to just do a gigantic congregate housing situation, which is like, because getting along is not something that the Americans. No, I mean, really, I always tell our staff, we'd all be fighting if we all lived in a house together, without a doubt. You know, so I expect this of families, because everybody has their own room and a lock on it, et cetera, but they still have to share a kitchen and a dining area and adjust schedules. And we sometimes have 8 or 9 families in this giant place, right? And they manage. But I'll tell you, after 2 years, because we figure for most, not all, it usually takes 2 years if you're starting from zero to get up to something that you actually can find a house, you get your name up on a list, and we almost have 100% success that they get into housing and they got a job and they're managing their lives. You know, but also these are not clients who have mental health issues or substance abuse issues. They're people who are actually going to mainstream back into the.
I would say though, Judy, we see similar things at Live Oak, and we don't have the same length of time yet, but the amount of time it has taken people to stabilize and get ready to move on was longer than I thought.
Yeah.
But they're also been super successful, and then some not, and some not. But it's not like, oh, you just need to stabilize for a couple months and move on. It's much longer than that. And so
much longer.
Those are important realities to face as well.
And oftentimes it's, especially if it's mental health, it's because they'll start taking their medication, they'll be doing well, and then they stop taking the medication because they feel like, well, I feel better, I don't have to do it anymore. And then they have, you know, their auditory or visual hallucinations again. And so it becomes a little bit difficult because then they crash back down.
Right.
And so that's the case for that. But as regards to Sage, I think long-term stays, although it might seem interesting, I think they are more beneficial, to be honest. I read a Harvard article which stated like not having a time frame put on shelters and even housing shows more successful outcomes. And it's less stressful on the employees that have to do the service delivery because they don't have to worry about kicking individuals out in 6 months. And then that messes up the rapport that they built and tried to build with those individuals staying there, that they feel like they're a part of that family that can help give them this empowerment to be more resilient and self-sufficient, which is a part of the low barrier housing. And so I don't think that they should have any time frame. I mean, I've heard many places that have said, and even in this article, they had one where it says, you stay here for 6 months, save all your money, and then you go into the real world and get housing, and then back into homelessness again. It is not effective to have a time frame. You need to let clients work at their own pace.
Well, like Judy said, it's taking up to 2 years to get stable from nothing. People who are homeless are, in many cases, have literally nothing. It takes time to get a job, to get stable physically. Maybe if you have medical issues, behavioral health issues, that all takes time. That's not something you can just say, okay, you're gonna 3 months and you're ready to go. It's even like things like, okay, we got you a job. We have a couple families, we got mom a job. Great, well, where's childcare? I got fired because my kids were sick, went home from school, I had to leave work. There's so many intricate little details of getting your life together. Yeah, it's hard to put a time on that. We still got a big discussion.
Yeah, we do. We got a totally different topic and a difficult one coming up.
So we should offer open it up to public comment though,
For our, especially for our Zoom folks.
Any questions, comments, public comment? Okay, great. Are we going back to HMIS performance measure?
Yes, we are.
All right.
So Veronica's just gonna very briefly introduce this item, and then I'm gonna kind of walk us through some of the challenges that we are struggling with.
So before we get to the policies and procedures, the May 2025 data completeness report is in your packet for the full system. We're hoping to pilot the new data dashboard at the next HMIS committee meeting. So whatever we're able to share there, we'll bring to the next meeting. We've made some recommended revisions to the HMIS policies and procedures that are only for discussion today. We're not approving anything. The revisions are on page 3 under who uses HMIS. Page 8 identifies some clarification regarding non-residential projects using HMIS. Throughout the document, we made updates changing Mendocino County Health and Human Services Agency, or HHSA, to Mendocino County Department of Social Services, or MCDSS. And then we have a fairly new document from last year, but we haven't done many updates to the HMIS policies and procedures. But I added a new appendix E for the partner agency participation, privacy, and data sharing of that. I'm going to turn it over to Megan to discuss the revisions.
Okay, so I'm gonna reorient us to the kind of 2 issues before us today that Veronica and I, as HMIS lead people responsible for this right now, need guidance on. So the first one is around law enforcement agency access to HMIS. So that's the one that's on page 3 in your packet, but it's 17 in the packet overall. It's 3 on the HMIS guidelines.
It's 47.
All right, 47. Totally not typing at all. Page 47 and page 3. So as a reminder, we've had a request from the city of Fort Bragg to allow their crew team access to HMIS. It's been a challenging conversation because we've been trying to figure out how to respond to that request. We need to handle that one separately than the other agencies that have requested access to HMIS, although they're kind of linked in a little bit of a way that we'll get to. So we haven't yet found an example of a COC in California that explicitly allows access to a law enforcement agency. So we've looked at some different policies. We asked our financial, not our federal technical assistance provider people. ICF, it was a different, wasn't Heather, that was a different guy, who sent us LA County's policy, because LA County did a lot of work on this. And then we copied LA County's language into this draft for you all to see. So LA County's language is that law enforcement agencies and their employees are not eligible to participate in access, blah, blah, blah. And then there's some specific allowable disclosures for law enforcement, which are the allowable disclosures that are listed in the HUD regulations. So the only regulations that tell you who can and can't participate in our HMIS system are from HUD. And the only organizations specifically called out as only being allowed to release information in specific cases, like a subpoena or an emergency, or there's some other things in there, are law enforcement agencies. So we're kind of stuck with that. We checked with our HMIS consultants, who, Nutmeg Consulting. What is the guy's name? I can't remember his first name right now.
Paul Schmitz.
Runs, he used to run Chicago's HMIS. He manages all of Connecticut State's HMIS. And Tashika, who works with 22 states, they said they don't know of any examples of law enforcement accessing HMIS. So we've been seeking this information on how to address this issue. What we're left with is, I'm not comfortable without a legal opinion on whether or not to allow a law enforcement agency access to HMIS. So I was kind of stuck with that. But I wanted guidance and input and direction from the COC board on what the next step should be. So that was me laying the groundwork, and now I'm curious what you all have to say.
So that's one change. Do we want to change?
I think we should talk about this one before we go to the second one. Yes.
I definitely would have consultant for legal first. Only because we don't know, it's not our realm. I just don't know what they're asking to use the HMI system for. I mean, you always think bad, but it might not be bad. It might be them inputting some information that's in there. I don't know.
Yeah,
So I'm actually really familiar with this topic.
Yeah.
And HUD released a notice in 2004. And they did some guidance and recommendations after that. And then in 2018, they rolled all of that back to the 2004 notice. And it specifies only very specific purposes that personally identifying information can be disclosed to law enforcement. And it's very strict on what those are. We have people who disclose if they use drugs. That's a crime. We have people who disclose if they've experienced domestic violence. Law enforcement officers are required to follow up on that if they hear of it.
And if they have children, then it puts them at risk of CPS, so.
And so there's some significant concerns regarding, I know there's so many benefits to an outreach team being able to have access to HMIS, but when that outreach team is governed by a law enforcement agency, it changes things. It changes how that data has to be used by that entity.
And it may also change the perception of the organizations doing work for them, right? So if they know that their information is going to be shared with law enforcement, then those participants might be timid to get services because they're thinking that it's going to be shared with the law enforcement agency. Sorry, yeah, it's going the wrong way.
I do want to say that the Fort Bragg Crew program has explained really eloquently and very powerfully why they're interested in this, and I believe it's very above board. So you said why they want access. I know this particular program wants access for all the reasons we would actually want them to have access, to reduce duplication of services, to care for their individuals better, to make sure that the communication is really clear. So I believe that the intention is really totally above board and very positive. That being said, any system like a medical record system or has safeguards in place, and you don't normally hand over the keys to your system without some rules involved. So I can give an example. Our school system has data that they're the best place to know the best contact information for a family. I sure wish I could get into their system whenever I wanted and find out what the most recent phone number is for a homeless family. Hands down, school systems have that information. They would never give me the ability to do that, and they shouldn't. So I think that what we're struck with is that we, as a COC, now have responsibility for a system that should have disclosure, you know, have safeguards, just like a medical record system or the school system or our Medi-Cal system, for example. I know all of you would love to know who had Medi-Cal and when it was due, and I can't possibly let you just have access to the Medi-Cal system. So that's that question. It's not necessarily, to me, it's not necessarily the motives of the individual wanting it. It's what you do with a system where we cannot shut it down to individuals. We've decided that on our HMI system on purpose, because if you like, if Paul could only look at the people he had worked with, he'd lose the visibility to see the rest of the system. So we haven't wanted to lock things down by a program for good reason. So it leaves this wide open. Either you get the keys to the whole system or no keys. We don't have a way to limit it.
Oh,
What?
What's your opinion?
I'm not on the board. She's in her world knitting and thinking. It sounds like our personal opinions are kind of moved a little bit around
I
this,
think so.
and whether or not we even want to is irrelevant to some extent because of some legality issues around HMIS and HUD regulations that have reasons that they exist, and there are arguments that they are cumbersome and doing harm to our ability to function as a coordinated effort. And so I don't know, if HUD says a thing about what we can and can't do with HMIS, they're kind of in charge of HMIS. I don't know.
I mean, I think so. I like you, Sage, I was sort of like, first I was thinking it wasn't, but I mean, you could approach it. Do we want to do this or not is one question. Is this legally allowed or not? Are we opening ourselves up for liability or not? Is a different question. And that was the question where I was like, I am not equipped to make a legal decision. I don't think any of us are.
Question,
Is it legal?
isn't that the first
That's
question?
probably the first question.
It's the first question.
The only question.
The question is only relevant if the first question is yes.
Yes. Right, okay. So then the second question to you all is, I got a little bit stumped on how we get the answer to that legal question. So I could ask county council, there's a cost associated to that. Does the COC, definitely. I mean, would the COC support the cost of whatever that is? They may or may not need to hire an outside legal person because it might not be within their wheelhouse, like HUD regulations. So quite frankly, it might not be. So then we start getting into questions that I'm looking for some direction. I'm kind of not
Don't we
sure.
have a HUD TA?
Yes, we do.
And we got.
And HUD has a legal,
They were the ones who gave us the Los Angeles example.
and then HUD has a legal department. So can you guys just access it through HUD's legal department to see? I could submit an aspect,
We could try.
but that would be, because I know HCD has their legal department.
I think what we've learned is when you say that, they'll say, you should get some legal advice.
Yeah.
We're asking all of them, why don't you ask your lawyer? And we're like, okay. So that's been a little bit of the loop we've been in, Camille, is that they're like, well, go ask your lawyer.
Darn.
But I could go a little bit down this road. I could ask county council, and if they're like, well, that's a $50,000 project, I could bring it back to the board. Would that?
It shouldn't be $50,000.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I would say if the board authorized, but if the board authorized Veronica and I to seek a legal opinion, that would be up to a certain dollar amount, because this would it would need to come out of COC funds in some ways, probably half. I'm not exactly sure what it would look like, but I'm mindful of, if none of you are interested in this, then I don't want to ask the legal question, but if you feel like it's worth it, we can pursue that.
I'm interested in exploring that.
Okay.
I think that we are asking jails and enforcement agencies to change their approach to these sorts of things. And that is happening in some places, and I certainly think that you need to be careful about being on the cutting edge and forefront of that. But, yeah, I think that we should be educated about, what those options are.
So the question of is it legal would be worth knowing.
So,
Okay. And Halleck, I'm gonna call you out a little bit because you're the attorney in the room. Do you have any opinion or thought? Not opinions, it's not a legal opinion. Don't give me a legal opinion. Do you have thoughts?
I understand that in terms of the program, and I don't think there's any like intentions are good. I don't think intentions are necessarily going to get you the answer you want in terms of, I don't think it matters. I'm not that familiar with all the questions you all ask or any of the information you get through HMIS. I would be concerned as somebody like giving my information if I were a person that's unhoused, and knowing that law enforcement has access to it, just because of what law enforcement is required to do sometimes, and particularly right now, and where information is going. So, your client, you all know your clients better. I would think that there would be a chilling effect, and ability for them to be completely upfront with everything going on in their lives. Because you would have to, if it's legal, you would have to disclose who's getting this information and be very clear that law enforcement will have access to the information being disclosed. I would be very concerned about that.
So
Okay,
I
that's your
understand.
opinion. Sorry.
So I just wanted to clarify something, because I forgot from way back when we switched over to this system, but it's sort of an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
With.
There's no way to wall off.
No.
Right.
That's where I do start getting, I know our people would be really uncomfortable and that if there was a way to set it up that we could say, because it's fairly new that we have a social service department working inside of a law enforcement or a social service program working inside of a law enforcement department, which is what is making this a little complicated because we want our social services workers to be tied in. And we don't want law enforcement as a whole to have access to HMIS for very legitimate reasons.
Yeah, and I think with the policy, we know and trust Fort Bragg crew, but am I gonna know and trust some other law enforcement organization that says they have or whatever? So like I'm gonna
trust them to do their job within their scope and their role, but that's not homeless services. That's figure out where the person who has this open warrant last to us.
Right, or if the access could only be for the provider who is providing services, then that would be helpful.
A different
When the
conversation.
supervisor has access, who's not technically a part of the division, but is supervising over that division, that's where I think there's that disconnect. He's not providing the services as you, Jeanette. So since he's over you, but he's not in your department, for him to have access when he's not providing any services makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think, sorry, we're just asking for our current team. There's 3 of us right now.
Just your team?
Yeah, and it's kind of like our internal database with law enforcement, and I'll just be really short on it. It has a footprint. It tells you who's on there and who's not. And so it would just be for our 3 members. We're adding a 4th member. We have we have a strong point of why it would be beneficial. I'll also add that I also work under youth opiate response through the state opiate response. And so I do a lot of intervention prevention for opioid use. They're actively using. I don't walk down to patrol and say these persons are using it. If I find out that people are manufacturing fentanyl, completely different over I have somebody that I've helped get into residential treatment. And even when I have youth, they're like, I'm drinking every day. Okay, you're here for help. So I'm not doing and if I break that trust with that individual, even kiddos, I'm not doing a CPS report on them because it's when you go to the mental health provider, they're not endangering themselves or others. So I'm not doing an outside report, I'm helping them. So I think you know, and it's not a crime to have a substance use disorder, mental illness, or to be homeless. So, but we don't go and report to patrol. They kind of tell us, we're like, hey, I saw your client, or I'll hear it over the radio and we'll go. And I know it's further conversation, but as the policing is changing and they're approaching it differently. I've never been a law enforcement officer, I'm not sworn, that a lot of them are having homeless outreach teams, and it's really new. And if it's not happening now, the curve is going to that direction and we'll be there. So I think it shifts what the question is a little bit when we reframe it to that, because it's not, can we have law enforcement in our HMIS? It's that, can we have social service workers who are embedded in a law enforcement department?
I think that would be the question we would ask legal. And I mean, that would be what a legal person would have to answer that question.
And what, are there like specific clauses we could put in the agreement to restrict
I think the
the sharing of information between the social services staff with the?
I think the challenge that we face is that when we look at the HUD regulations, you know, they're from 2004. Jeanette's right. Law enforcement organizations were not having these kinds of programs in 2004. So it was it was developed in a different environment. Nonetheless, it's the only rule that's there. So it is what we have. And I do worry. I sometimes think, I'm going to tease you a little bit here, Veronica. Veronica might sometimes comes up and I'm like, that would never happen. But she said, what? The story she said, I was like, you know what? I can see the risk there. If somebody, a homeless individual, ends up in some sort of criminal situation and they say, well, how did you get that information about me? And they got it through HMIS, then the county and all of us are actually, you know, as a COC could be, there could be some risk there. So I didn't even think that through, right? But let's say, you know, you're arrested and you're like, well, how did you know I was blah, blah, blah? And it's like, oh no, they knew that because that information was available through HMIS, and that was not done through an MDT, which is a place you can share that information. And so then you have a case, and it's just, so I mean, that sounds kind of far-fetched, but I think that's how a legal person would think about it.
I see the thing between like the social services embedded in law enforcement, like I don't think like there's a big distinction. I would still think like you'd have to really distinguish it, like being separated, and I think that would be really hard to do. And I'm kind of just going back, I think it was a while back where I think you were talking about the program and like if, so I think I read an article in the paper and there was like, if somebody doesn't follow through with the program, then because they get stopped, you know, because they're violating anti-camping ordinance. And this thing that's being held over their head is if they complete the program through you guys, then they're not going to be prosecuted. I think that's just, so that kind of shows like it doesn't show a separation. It shows like it's still part of the
Law enforcement.
because you're acting as a law enforcement. You're kind of holding that criminal penalty over their heads. So I think I'm just trying to make an analogy, like in terms of trying to separate it. I think it would be difficult to do that in perception wise, even if you could do it legally, which I think would also be difficult.
It feels like we're so stuck on this though. So if it's, you know, I think like Paul said, is it legal or is it not?
Yeah, it
That's your
sounds like
first
to me,
step.
that
The
sounds
next
like
step
it.
is, if it's not, we all want to see this change. I think where law enforcement takes a little different approach with our community members. So how do we connect with them and support them? If we can't give you this, how can we as a COC make your guys' work kind of easier and more collaborative with us? And maybe there's another option out there. Maybe it's not necessarily
Access to HMIS. It was not a coincidence that I reintroduced the homeless MDT this morning. So the homeless MDT specifically lays out law enforcement, probation as partners. So I was specifically saying they are invited and welcomed into an MDT process for that specific reason. So I think you're because it's less charged, I think about the student database. I would love access to the student database, but I can't. But what I can do is call Blythe Post under the guise of this, who will tell me anything I need to know because we both have signed this homeless MDT protocol. So she can help me find a parent that I can't find. So it feels like these systems have like their lockdown system, and then there's a pathway that is legally endorsed to be able to share information for the benefit of that specific client. So I totally agree with you, Brianna, which is why I do think we need to beef up our homeless MDT protocol to allow that sharing of information, again, with law enforcement, with probation, with criminal justice partners, because that's what it was designed for. But we need a legal opinion no matter. Maybe the legal person will say, that's totally fine. Then we'll have another conversation. So is it okay for me to seek legal advice? I'm not going to do it for more than $10,000 without coming back to you. How does that sound?
Honestly, I would say 5,000. And 5,000, I'm not even finished with like sending the LSATs and I'm like, what the hell? Excuse my French.
Okay.
$5,000 is the highest, but I mean, it should be, I mean, you're in something around, it's like what?
Shouldn't be
1,500?
5,000. Okay. Okay, so I will not come back. I will come back to you if something, there's a twist on this. Otherwise, I will seek a legal opinion up to $5,000. Is that, if you're comfortable with that?
And it's all contingent on the hours they do too.
I don't even know. I just wanted, I don't think. Okay, so we'll table this until we have a legal opinion about whether it's legal or not. And we'll go through that process of seeking that legal opinion. Okay with that? Okay. We're running out of time now. Okay, so now we get to a different conversation. We talked about whether something's legal or not, which is law enforcement. Now we have to decide whether we want to or not. And I'm not talking about law enforcement agencies here. So if you move to page 52, which is also number 8. Aside from law enforcement, we've had requests from organizations who want access to HMIS, again, for good reasons. They want to, we think they're good reasons. They want to look for their clients, care for their clients, coordinate, know who's doing things with various, who's working with who. But they're not required to use HMIS. They're what some COCs call non-mandated. So you have your mandated agencies that have to use, which are all of you that we've funded, that have to use HMIS. And then there's another category called non-mandated. So no funding, no regulations is requiring them to use it, but they want to. The language you have before you just kind of makes it clear that if you're a non-residential project and you're not required to use HMIS, you're not going to be granted HMIS. Kind of what we would prefer, but it's really up to the COC to decide if you want to look at that differently. I tell you the pros and the cons really fast. Pros, you have more partners using it. Adventist Health does a lot of work with homeless individuals. Maybe they could, they can see what's going on. Like you're bringing more partners into the fold. Cons, it's really hard to keep this data clean. Veronica spends a ton of time cleaning up data that has like real implications if people are doing it sloppy. It's just a lot more for us to manage if there's kind of this profusion of people not required to use it. If we open it up to some individuals, we probably have to open it up to others who meet that same requirement. If we have organizations seeking clients for ECM, community supports, HMIS is a gold mine in which to do that. We don't always know what people's motivations are to want to be able to have access to HMIS. So these are the kind of complexities that we're dealing with.
One of the things that's going to add some complexities is when DHCS and Partnership Health Plan of California roll out transitional rents.
That's right.
Because it's going to be provided through medical providers. And it's going to be a residential project.
Not medical providers. Yeah, community supports.
Adventist Health is going to be doing transitional rents.
But they're considered, they're like, but they're not the only source of.
No, but if they provide transitional rents, people experiencing homelessness, DHCS says they have to use HMIS. And
So yeah, there is a growing list of what we were talking about before, the BHBH funding, the Behavioral Health Bridge Housing funding is supposed to be using HMIS. They're not totally yet. We haven't really welcomed them in yet, and we don't, but there's already a growing lengthy list of what are essentially going to be mandated providers. So Veronica, you're seeking some direction on that as well.
Wouldn't this umbrella the first one?
I think if the answer was yes to the first one, then you'd fall into the second category. But
so we then either way, if that was yes, then that would be what it standard.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Exactly. Right. No, then it would become moot. So it doesn't make sense. However, I think there could be a point in the future, Jeanette, where you guys did receive funding that required you to enter it. So then we'd have this problem.
Yeah, because our funding goes to hospitality. We pay for bed spaces.
Yeah. And then they use HMIS.
Right. So you're right. It might, if the first question is, yes, it's legal, you might be caught here too. But this one is more, this is not a legal question. This is kind of up to the COC. I'm trying not to influence it because I also am aware of how much work would be involved in welcoming non-mandated providers, but I'm trying to set that aside and see what you all think.
Well, when you say use, what do you mean use?
So there's two kinds of use. There's viewer only and there's like enter stuff. I think that's really the only kinds of use we have right now. So that would be a question.
And enter stuff in specific programs, projects.
Set up their own project.
You can't just enter willy-nilly in someone else's project.
No, so if like, let's say we resolved all the legal issues and that those didn't exist and crew wanted to have a project in HMIS, they would be entering in their project.
Yeah.
Right. But they could see all the rest of the projects.
And the language in the policies and procedures says access.
It's
So
not,
whether it's accessing, having read-only access, or it's using it, it's all of the above.
but you're right, there's two different, there's, I can't think of any other user, but access, when you said user, it's either viewer or enter.
Well, I wasn't asking because of the technicality of it. I'm asking because we HMIS. Is there view?
Yeah.
To collaborate with it. What I was hearing last meeting. Whoever, I don't know, I can't. Even since it. Go in there and poke around.
We haven't, because we were kind of like, no, we didn't deeply ask them what they wanted. So we haven't fully asked that question. I'm wondering, because I know they're new ECM providers, they're new community support providers who want to move into this county. So I was making a bunch of educated guesses, but I wasn't, we didn't ask them a lot of questions because we weren't sure if we even wanted to open that door. We can. So back to LA County, they have a very structured way that they kind of decide whether someone can be a user or not. They also monitor them really heavily. If you're wandering around outside your client project, they might start asking questions. So like there's a whole monitoring process to that as well. San Joaquin County makes you, and I asked them what their tool was. You kind of almost like apply to the COC. You have to kind of like explain why you want to use it. And I was like, how do you decide once they've sort of made their pitch? So they allow like people to make their pitch. And then I guess, I don't know what they're deciding. I don't know what their tool is to decide whether or not they to use it or not. Well, I was hoping it was a piece of paper and it wasn't just like a, you know, whether I like you or not, but maybe it is. I don't know.
But then also,
Like if it's a LA for service for community supports, you're almost buying information. I mean, but also LA County, they're a lot obviously bigger than the Mendo, right? And so like they have the funding source to have like their own HMIS department that would oversee that. It's like the CIA, like, you know, Mendo doesn't have those funds.
Right?
Right?
Pointing that out. Right. We do
Yeah.
not have an HMIS department.
It's just, and it would be Veronica. Veronica's like, no, brother, I'm not gonna give people the clearance to get into HMIS, right?
I worry about our data privacy responsibilities to our clients.
Right.
I have a question. If we have a stricter policy that says you have to have a requirement through some contract that says you need to use HMIS, are there any current HMIS users that we'd have to then cancel their access?
No.
Those
The only poor ones that did was crew. So we already, so then we have to.
We've got to then decline some of our local facilities, but.
No, we don't currently.
Any of these projects are operated by, these project types listed here are operated by people that also have a residential project.
I know the benefit of having a care coordination system where and having it tied to contracts is pretty restrictive and limiting, because I'm just like, as a community supports provider, even if you don't have a contract that is requiring one, being a participant in coordinated entry is like, please participate in coordinated entry and update your client's chart. If you're their housing navigator, you should be updating your client's coordinated entry. That's just a pretty so somehow we're inhibiting our ability to really leverage our coordinated entry system to some extent. If we restrict the HMIS access to only if you have a contract that requires you, but then how do we narrow it down so that there's like, you are a local entity providing involved in the COC. It could be you're a local entity involved in the COC. You maintain active COC membership and access and participation. I feel okay about that. I just worry about the stuff that is going on with some outside entities.
Random vultures that we don't.
Randomly picking up community support clients And it
I see that
is
too.
not easy to switch clients from one community support provider to another. So when we get clients at B2, they've already been assigned to some non-local agency, and we're like, how's that person helping you? What is actually happening? And they're like, who the heck are you even talking about?
Right.
And then we talk to partnership to try to get them switched, and it is not easy.
No, I know.
So I don't want to make it easier for these outside organizations to do that to us, to our people.
I also feel like you
And also,
couldn't ethically do outreach based off of HMIS. Like, that's crazy as a community support to have this list in front of you and be like, cool, these people are all homeless. Let's see who has partnership. That's you.
so it's have a metric that says like you are a COC member and you active participate.
Yeah.
There's a person that you can hold accountable to how they're using.
So it would kind of limit it to that effort would be to welcome in local engaged providers while leaving a little bit of room, a small barrier for, yeah.
And it would incentivize some participation in COC.
So we could take coordinated entry off the list.
What do you mean, take it off the list?
If you're only wanting to do coordinated entry, that's okay.
Yeah, so but if somebody's doing coordinated entry, do they then have viewing access to the rest of the system?
Everything else, yeah. But they would have to actively be collecting and entering and reporting on these clients every
If
90
they
days.
never did, we'd go, you haven't entered somebody into coordinated entry in 6 months. What are you doing?
And also, I would be able to tell, we would be able to audit the clients that they see, and if they viewed clients other than the people they referred to coordinated entry, we'd be able to know, and we would inquire into why.
I'm not sure I like limiting it to coordinated entry. If some agency wants to see who this person's working
They'd
with.
still be able to see that.
I want our staff to be able to see who you're working with. We're here to collaborate. And I don't know if that's that easy to do in coordinated entry. I mean, now you're kind of a somewhat unidentified. I mean, do they have a program for these folks that can be a provider and that they're saying, hey, look, we're doing this work too. I don't get it.
They would still be able to go in and enter data as coordinated entry because they're a coordinated entry participating in agency. And then when they look under the client's profile and they go to entry exits, they see all of the other entry exits that the person is participating in, and they could go to the service tab and see any case managers that were assigned to the person. So that would still be there. They'd have access. It's an all or nothing.
So LA County kind of has these little threshold, like you have to have at least 50 participants or something, which might be too high for us, but it leaves a little bit of kind of getting a little bit more on what Sage is describing, like there's some parameters. It's not just random open access. There's some parameters to who would be eligible to be a non-mandated user. I think that's what they call it. Non-mandated agency, as opposed to you're a mandated agency. So it sounds like you though, Paul, are feeling comfortable with non-mandated agencies. You're feeling comfortable with non-mandated agencies, so an agency that's not mandated to use HMIS having access.
We're a system of care here, so I feel like, you should encourage participation. There's this thing going on. At least
It is real.
And it's bigger than just, it's not, somebody's taking your $384 a month or any of that. What it is that you got a client who's confused. Some of them don't know what's going on, with this thing. Some of them have like a weird idea about what's going on with that thing. They want this person in county or something to have some
magic key to the apartment.
Magic key to the apartment or some say in what they want our help. They also want this person to be managing the thing. You call that person and say, hey, look,
Joe's here.
We've known this person for, many years and they're in a bunch of our programs. And is there any chance that you can just release that tar? We've done it for people. We do it back and forth with Ukiah if it doesn't make any sense. There's nothing you can do for these folks over the phone. Sorry, there's just not. And so if what we decide here is to just let those folks start randomly calling, that's just, there's gotta be some sort of thing. And you should really only be using our HMIS if you have a client that you're serving within what we do here, you know. That's how I feel about it.
I don't know, Paul, maybe I'm not understanding, but I also believe that there is like a why, right? So if like the participant doesn't sign stating that they want their information shared with other agencies, if it's outside of the parameters, then, you know, I don't know if you can legally share. I mean, I think back in the day when I was trying to be a counselor, I couldn't tell anybody anything without an ROI, right? Even agencies that wanted to help. So I think that's the issue. And well, I mean.
Well, that's exactly an issue because, you know, when you have folks sign their informed consent to go into HMIS. So, but do they really know who all is looking at it?
Yeah, you do. It's in the informed consent, like where.
And then we're gonna add who to that? I don't even know who we're talking about.
Well, there's there's
You see
two,
where I'm coming
right,
from?
no,
You're
there's
gonna
right
add
now, there's two, I mean, I can't remember, there's three. Adventist Health has asked, and this other place called Mendocino something.
And there's a company in Riverside.
Right. So that's the request that we had, and as I said before, we were like, I don't know, we don't really know how to respond to this request that you have, because we don't have a clear policy in our HMIS policies.
Well, I just feel like it's just the same as the thing with the police department. As it was mentioned here, we've been working with crew for a long time, lovely. I personally would like them to be able to do that work. Then how do you structure this thing so that you're not just opening it up to police departments? And these legal things are like, well, you know, you don't word it right. And crew can do that. And then, you know, some other agency can come along and say, well, you know, these are your policies, so.
Exactly,
so used to the thing. Obviously, we want Adventists to be able to do what they're doing, but.
So like, right, this question was like, hi, Veronica, I hope this finds you well. I'm with this organization, a nonprofit organization that provides housing navigation, housing sustainable services to Medi-Cal members through Talent. I'd like to inquire about the process of gaining access to HMIS. Could you provide instructions on how we can receive training and be a part of the HMIS system? So this was pretty blatant. I'm like moving into your county, want to be a counselor, and I have HMIS. And I don't know anything about
That's
this
a
nice
red
person.
flag. Why is it a question like, how do we join your COC?
Right? This is why we're bringing this question to you. And this is why Veronica's suggestion is, let's halt right here at
Yeah.
an application.
I like Sage's suggestion of, you know, this gets talked in whatever committee. You gotta be a member here.
You gotta be a member.
Accountable.
And it sounded like what I was hearing, if we were gonna have a policy for non-mandated agencies, you need to be a COC member and you need to be willing to participate in coordinated entry or have a residential project. So if you have housing that is designated for homeless individuals, we do want you to participate. But it would be one of those two.
Yeah.
I'm not sure would weed out these vultures.
Residential project. It's not just
Coordinated
resident
entry.
or
Willing to
so
enter.
There's street outreach projects that could be required to use HMIS that isn't residential and isn't coordinated entry.
If you're required, you're fine. Okay, this is the non-mandated.
If there is any legislation,
do.
contract, regulation, anything that says this street outreach project or this day shelter project has to use HMIS, they get access.
I missed the part where you were saying if they're not required to use HMIS and they are a residential project or participating in coordinated entry, we're saying yes. And totally, great, okay.
But if you are not required and you're a day shelter,
We will say yes if you're doing coordinated entry.
Well, that's what you guys are discussing right now. That's as an option.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand. if you're coordinated entry and you are actively participating.
Well,
in
okay,
the
so let's say, let's use like a church group wants to do, a faith-based organization wants to do outreach. And they're willing to do coordinated entry.
Mhm.
We're saying, yes, you can have the keys to the whole HMIS system, because that's what it means.
And they are wanting to, and they are gonna come to the COC and
they're gonna be a
actively
COC
participate?
member.
Yes, I'd be comfortable with that. I'm one person and one agency, but
Should we add that in order to get HMIS access, the agency has to be a COC member?
yeah. Bruce, you got your hand up.
I just think it's important that we polish our policy first before we allow these things to happen, because I don't want to overwhelm that which you're taking care of when you have nobody to work on that.
Yeah.
To be honest, we need to do the underlying first, fix our cracks, and then create policy. I wouldn't say make a decision anytime soon. I would say where the policy states, any other organization, this is what you're gonna do. Like we have to have that disclosure. Really got to be part of this board. They got to learn onboarding, because me coming in here, I wasn't onboarding. We should have an onboarding for a COC member to understand what a COC is first.
You sink or you swim.
I know, I understand, and I love you guys, but we have some things that we gotta do first before we could even start saying, hey, let's come on aboard. And then here we go, having the same repetitive
Yeah.
things that keep happening. And I definitely want their team to be a part of it, but also want new organizations to understand we can't give out stuff, and we have people that are afraid of law enforcement. Yes, people are afraid of other people having access to their resources or their identification. So that should be top priority for us, right?
Yeah.
Because they're our experts, not us. They're the ones saying, I don't want this to happen. Like I said, for me, it's always based off, we're doing a survey. Do we allow this to happen? Do you want your information to be given out? We know because we do it day to day. You know, day to day what a person wants. But also know that if we don't have a polished policy, you know, to agree upon.
Right.
Do you
And
feel like you
Jeanette-
got at least some, like,
Well,
what's
it
our
sounds
next
to me
step?
like,
No, we've been all over the place.
Yeah, and
and
Jeanette,
I think we should, what I'm gonna suggest is that we don't allow any new people in while we continue to figure this out. And we don't wanna just do a like, sure, you can act without clarity. So right now, we will not allow new organizations in who are non-mandated until we can figure out what a non-mandated package would look like. And Priest is right, we gotta get a lot, like, what are we really asking them? Do we have all our ducks in a row? So the answer is not yet to some of these individuals that are asking, and maybe never, but we're starting with not yet. Okay. It needs more work.
they're on
Does
hold
that
until we.
supersede ours?
No, I'm still gonna seek a legal question. Right, we're gonna, because if the legal question is yes, then you'll fall into this next one.
And then this next level.
And then it'd be no, if it falls into that one.
But right now, we're not yet.
We don't have the policy ironed out yet, but I'm.
I feel like the
Feels like-
consensus is, actually, it feels to me like most people want a pathway
Mhm.
for non-mandated agencies
Yes.
that reduces the possibility of vultures.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly what that looks like
Outlined
yet.
Policy,
Right.
so there's no cracks for any.
And Jeanette, like, we love the work that you do, and we know you need access to it. It's just what we set the tone will affect everything. So it's just preparing that. So just, we appreciate you.
It's right, we have to set a policy that's beyond an individual program. It has to be, because again, Adventist Health, we all would, but these other random people. Yeah. Okay,
If you
so
make enough hoops for them to jump through, they'll win themselves.
that's what I'm thinking. I think you're right. If we create the pathway that has enough hoops, somebody who's genuinely motivated will go through those hoops.
Yeah, come here.
Jeanette will. So she's down there. Okay, thank you for all of that. I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. It's a really quick one. It had something to do with this, but I have a funding announcement, so we can't adjourn yet.
Do we still have? We lost Joanna and. We lost Faith.
I don't need to make any decisions, it's just discussions. Can I go fast, Paul? Okay, so I think we're gonna skip the Mendocino County Reentry Collaborative update. But I did want to announce that we are currently accepting nominations for our, 3 currently vacant and 3 upcoming expiring, board seats. They're outlined in your agenda. I have received 7 nominations. I've received a nomination for every single entity or person listed on the agenda, plus I received one for Blythe Post with MCOE. And then I wanted to share under the hat, that we are scheduling stakeholder meetings. I have a flyer for our coastal meeting that I wanted to pass out. It's occurring on Wednesday, June 25th at the Mendocino Coast Hospitality Center from 4 to 5:30 p.m. And that's open to anyone, general public. I'll be doing some targeted invitations. I'll be sending one to Supervisor Norval and Supervisor Williams as our coastal representatives or supervisors, as well as our managed care providers and some other folks that are on the HAP application. Are we doing a person with lived experience one separately from a stakeholder?
Yes.
Yes, you are. So that's the flyer that I have. We're also gonna be.
We're trying not to replicate last year's disaster.
Lived experience, focus groups on the same day at the coast. I'm not gonna disclose the time just because this is a public meeting and we're trying to keep it safe. And it's just for people with lived experience. I'll be doing one at B2 as well. And then we're also gonna be replicating the same open to anyone. I believe it's gonna be July 9th at Consolidated Tribal Health and immediately following it with a small break. Actually, I got it the other way around. We're gonna start with a targeted tribal session in the mid to early afternoon. Then we're gonna have a break and then it'll be open to the general public and all of the entities that I mentioned for the coast as well. So there's gonna be 6 separate meetings that are happening. We're gonna try to do a lived experience focus group in the North County as well. That's my update on that. And that's it.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for a deep conversation.
It's a lot to.
On a Monday.
Thank you all. Okay, very well.
Oh, yeah.